السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Welcome everyone. Peace be upon you. I'm the host again for Ifkar Al Alim, and my name is Abu Amran. And thank you all for coming to watch this second video. And today we wanted to talk about something that is very important for us to discuss, and it is about the destruction of a culture. And so when we talk about the destruction of a culture, there's been many different cultures that have been established throughout the existence of mankind. There's been many established and many destroyed. And so there are many things that lead to, or factors that lead to the destruction of a culture. And there are many reasons as to why a culture can thrive and exist. And so when we talk about culture, because remember, we always try to establish uh, some points of commonality, things that we can so that we're talking the same language. Uh, the culture is the art and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively. So these are the things that a group of people, if you will, have decided that these are the things that make up their particular group or their culture or their identity, and be that art or other types of ways of communicating, food or what have you, norms. And so these are the things that make up their culture, and they have a similarity within that. And so a group of people that live together that share some of those agreed upon similarities, they follow these norms and they agree to follow these norms and rules, and they form that culture. And so cultures exist within civilizations. And so there's many different definitions as to what a civilization is, but a civilization, for the sake of our discussion, is just a place or places where these cultures may exist. Okay, that there are things in place, there's an environment in place that will allow this culture to exist and to thrive. And so the members of such civilizations, they work together within these civilizations and act within their culture. And there could be multiple cultures within civilizations that interact with one another. They may have slightly different norms that live in the same civilization, and so or they may have very different norms, but they interact with one another. But the cultures or those different groups would have more similarity within each other than those who would outside that culture. But the commonality is that they abide by rules and that they live together according to these rules, and so that they're rewarded for following these rules, or they could be punished if they break the rules and it's significant violation of the rules that they've established. So many civilizations, as we know, as if we've learned in school or heard about in school, that many civilizations have existed. We've heard about the Roman Empire, the Third Reich. We've heard about different African kingdoms that existed, and so, or even, the establishment of the United States. And so these are civilizations, and many don't exist today, of course, but and many may not exist in the future, and they're to be replaced by other civilizations. And so, but we've heard about these, and so there are a number of different reasons as to why a civilization may not succeed. And so it may be conquered, or it may have outside influences that can come in and destroy the culture that are contrary to the system that culture has established, and it can come in and cause some destruction. And so, in some cases, new ideas may come in that may enrich the culture and make it better, but oftentimes invaders may come to that culture and take things away from it, or have a desire to, there's something that they want from the culture, so they'll take things away from it, or they may just decide that they consider it as an inferior culture and they will just destroy it altogether. And in some cases, it doesn't necessarily mean that a superior culture will destroy an inferior culture. It just could be factors that the inferior culture has some type of dominance in a particular area that will allow it to destroy the superior culture. So there's many reasons as to why cultures can be destroyed, and they can be enhanced as well. And so, but in order for cultures to start or civilization to start, there has to be foundations. And so strong cultures have very strong foundations. And foundations can take generations to establish, or they can, but ultimately, in order for them to be long-standing, they have to have some sound foundations, and they have to have things that they agree upon are going to be a part of those foundations. And so if they have those sound foundations, then the culture can be considered very fruitful and provide a lot of benefit for the people and a lot of benefit for mankind. Okay. And so when we look at the African American culture, okay, which is the topic of today. And so the African American culture is a relatively new culture in the sense that it has only existed in the amount of time that the African or the American civilization has existed. Okay, what is America? And we know there were people here before this was America. And so, but once the European Americans came and established that this is going to be the United States, or this is the United States of America, then the African American culture resulted as a from the creation of that. And so the conditions that led to the creation of the African American culture were very, hostile conditions. I mean, it wasn't something that the people chose willfully, that this is something that they wanted to establish, because their reasons for coming here were not, they didn't decide to come here. They were forced to come here. And so, and of course, they had other cultures, African cultures, West African cultures, or Central African cultures that they had previously were civilizations that they were a part of. And so when they came to the United States or the Americas at that time, the colonies, I guess, if you will, before the United States existed, so they had to establish a culture so that they could survive, and so that they could live within this new environment in which they were brought into. And so this was somewhat of a hostile existence, but they did the best they could to try to establish this culture. And so when we look at the African American culture today, there it's had its greatness. That there have been contributions from the arts, from science, from medication, or from the medical field, from technology, that have enhanced not only the uh, African American culture, but also the greater American culture as well. So we hear about the contributions from many different scientists and artists and so forth that have contributed to the culture. But ultimately, when we look at the culture that exists today, there has been quite a bit of destruction. And so, again, when you look at a culture that's been established from, uh, a very hostile situation that's had many invaders, if you will, into the culture that have, when it gains some prevalence, that they go and destroy the culture and implement or push things into the culture that can lead to its destruction, then you'll have many different breakdowns within that. And so, and honestly speaking, the American culture was never, you know, in general, the American culture was never a very healthy culture in the first place. It was something that, without question, uh, racism is within the fiber of the American culture, whether people want to admit that or not. But it was established to offer racism, and that was an essential part of the American existence was racism. And the people who um, were affected by this negatively the most, you know, were, the African American people and the Native American people. But it's not that the dominant group or the European group, um, it didn't affect them negatively either, because they were affected by this as well, this poison that their culture had introduced into the system. But um, the natives and the African American people were at most adversely affected by this. I guess when you look at the actual physical and economic results of their cultures compared to other groups. And so so the American culture was something that has dominated the African American culture, but it's caused a lot of destruction because of the nature of racism towards the African American culture. And so when we look at that, there are issues that have affected the African American people more so than other groups within the American culture, okay, within the American civilization, if you will. And so let's look at some of those and look what are some solutions for some of these problems. And so again, uh, the solutions that I offer are from an Islamic perspective. And so if there are, and these are proven solutions. And so oftentimes individuals may have ideas they feel, well, I know something that's better than that. And so, well, if we had something better, if we know something better, then when we tried to implement those things, they haven't worked. And so, but we see outside the culture that these things have been able to be successful and have brought success to these cultures. And so it's important to consider that you need some proven solutions to show that these changes can be effective for the people. So if we look at the African American culture, the foundation of the culture is Christianity. That Judeo-Christian background is the foundation of the culture. And that was something that was given to the people from the European American influences. And so that is the foundation of the culture, if you will. Now, not to say that all African American people are Christian, but the majority clearly are, about 84%. And previously even higher than that. And so this is something that is viewed as the foundation of the culture, and the sense of morality and justice, from the most part, is derived from that uh, system, if you will. And if we start with that, but if we look at some of the issues with the um, uh, the problems that we have within the African American culture, for example, in the 1970s, about 35.6% of Black men and 27.7 roughly percent of Black women had never been married. Okay, and that's pretty high, but it's but now, at least in 2020, that had jumped to 51.4% of Black men and 47.5% of Black women. So roughly half will never get married or have never get married. And the percentages continue to rise because of the lack of emphasis that's placed on marriage. And when we look at marriage, there's many important things that marriage brings to culture and to a society. In Islam, marriage is a contract between a man and a woman, and the contract is for established for the pleasure of Allah, and it is a recognition in the community that this couple have a legal right to be together, to have a husband and wife relationship with one another. And the beauty of that is that it protects the woman. Of course, it protects the man as well. And then it protects the lineage for the children. Okay. And so the way that protects the woman is that the man within this contractual relationship, the man has an obligation to be financially responsible for the woman and for the children. He has that obligation. And so what that means is that he has an obligation to go out and work and provide for the family. Not to say that women can't work, but it's definitely the man's responsibility to take care of the household. And so then also when he has children with that woman, with his wife, okay, those children take his last name to say that he is responsible for those children, and those children will inherit from him, okay, when he dies. And so this is a preservation of the family. And so, yes, we know that marriage exists in other, ways of life as well, in Christianity and so forth. But again, if we're looking at the African American situation, or the problems that existed, okay, they've had Christianity, but has it really made those, because of the environment, a lot of those institutions begin to erode away. And so we'll look at some of the ways that these things can be protected. But in Islam, this is a requirement, and so there's no allowance for a man and a woman to have relations, to have children, and so forth out of wedlock, because of the emphasis that's placed on having a marriage contract, if you will, between the man and the woman. And so that keeps the woman's honor in place, and that protects the man as well with his desires. He is only allowed to have relations with his wife, and so, and all other women are forbidden for him to have these relationships with. And so, what that does is that cuts down on the situations where women or men or children are born out of wedlock, and women are taken advantage of outside of marital relations. So they are protected, because in an Islamic relationship, the men have different roles than the women do. Okay. And so the men are expected to be the leaders of the household, and the women are expected to follow the direction of the leaders, of the men in the household. Okay, and so the women have responsibility to maintain the home. Again, not to say that they can only work in the home or whatever, or only live in the home, what have you, but their primary responsibility is maintaining the home, and to make sure that the children are maintained in the home as well. And so the man has a greater responsibility outside, and he has a responsibility as well as to make sure that the provisions are inside the home to take care of the children and to take care of the wife as well. So that's one thing. And then when we look at, we talked about the lineage, and currently about 67% of Black children are born into single parent households. And so if we look at the model that Islam has provided, that would eliminate that issue. Because what are some of the issues that are involved, or that arise whenever we have these single parent households? Okay, we know about behavioral and mental health issues that come from that. Okay, and so it's important that children are raised with mothers and fathers in the home. Okay, that's the best opportunities that they have in this life to be successful. And so with behavioral and mental problems, especially from a young age, that can lead to other problems, school problems, for example. So then if a child has behavioral issues, they're not able to be successful in school. And then so that leads to not getting the education that they need to be successful in life. And so perhaps they don't learn to read very well, or they don't do very well in math and science. And so that can limit their opportunities that they would have within society, because they don't have the education that they need to be successful. And so then from that, I guess in converse to that, Islam has a very strong emphasis on education. The first command that was given to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was "Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq." Read in the name of the Lord who creates. And so this is from that, you hear oftentimes about Muslim children, from a young age memorizing the entire Quran by heart. memorizing. So goes to show that there's a very strong emphasis placed on education when it comes to Islam. Okay. And so worldly education as well as education of the religion. And so when there is a culture that encourages this education, then the children will see uh, other children around them who also emphasize that and find it important. And so they will find that it's important as well. And so right now we see that, for example, in the African American community, unfortunately, amongst younger people, there's not a strong emphasis on education because we can see it in the things that draw their attention. Be that the videos and social media and things online that show that there's unfortunately a very strong emphasis on buffoonery and other things that don't matter very much, and so and less emphasis on education. And this is something that has eroded over time because it wasn't always this way. But again, because of the factors that we have within the American situation, the American civilization, that have contributed to a weak foundation that we already had, and has just caused, more of a problem. It's similar to the if you had a house that was built out of mud and it was the hurricane were to come and destroy the house, it'd be much easier to destroy, and you would need to rebuild that whole house versus if the house was made of brick. Not to say the hurricane wouldn't destroy a brick house, but it'd be less likely to completely destroy that house. At least the foundation would probably still be in existence, or if it was a tornado, for example, um, then it'd be much easier to rebuild the house than it would be if you used weaker material. And so this is the same thing with civilization. When you have a civilization that's been based off a flimsy foundation, then it's easier that whenever there are poisons or destructive elements that come uh, into that civilization or into that culture, it's much easier to destroy them than it is once you establish a very strong foundation. And Islam offers a very strong foundation for a culture. So, besides the emphasis on education, uh, we know that poor education, okay, will lead to issues with employment. And so that can be very problematic, is that when you have issues with employment, then you have issues of how are you going to support yourself, or how can you live in a situation or in an environment that will allow you to have safety, or security, because you don't have the financial means to do that. And so your food securities become a problem. Uh, the protection from the elements become a problem. Okay. And that leads to other stresses within life in general. And then that can lead to drug and alcohol use. Now, in Islam, drugs and alcohol are forbidden, they're not allowed. And so, for the most part, when we look at society, we see that drugs and alcohol have much more of a detrimental effect to society than they do good. Most people, there are some people that may be able to use cocaine or whatever on an occasional basis, or they have enough money, enough means that they're able to function relatively okay in society. But we know that most people that use these things are not able to function in society. And so it ultimately leads to other destructive behavior within society. Same with alcohol. We see that most people, often a lot of people drink alcohol in America, but there are many people that have problems with drinking alcohol and they become alcoholic and they do destructive behavior. They may become abusive, physically abusive whenever they drink alcohol. They make may make poor decisions when they drink alcohol that may lead to hurting other people or to the death of other people. And so, for the most part, these are things that society has said that alcohol is okay, and it's something that they're not willing to give up. But we find that in societies that don't have these things openly and readily available, that they have a much more peaceful coexistence with the members of that society than versus societies that do have these type of issues there, or these type of poisons. Also, um, things that have crept into uh, that are a very big part of the destruction of the African American culture is sexual exploitation. We have a culture that severely exploits the women in this society. And so there was Alicia Matthews from the University of Washington, Tacoma. She had written a paper about the hypersexualization of Black women in the media. And so, and this is a very huge injustice that takes place. In that when you look at social media or when you look in general on television, that it's like there in so many ways that the women have been overly sexualized. And in order to sell things, it's like the sexualization of women is a very huge part of sales and just of marketing and everything else. And this is a very big problem, and to the point that it's become a part of the culture that women may not even realize it, but they sexualize themselves, and it draws attention to them, and then it takes away from the respect that they are deserved because men will see them as sexual objects. And so, and not to say, women would say, well, why is the blame all on me for, the men have to have some level of control and lower their gaze, from an Islamic standpoint and not participate in this type of behavior. But these are the natural instincts that that Allah, that God has given to men. And so when they see these things, they're naturally attracted to these type of to this when they see women like this. And so it is important for us to work together to take away this element of society because of course, women want to be known for not just to be known as sexual objects. They want to be recognized for the brilliant minds that they have, for the contributions that they can give to society, and so forth. And so, with that, it's important for all of us to take that sexual element off of the table, and so that we can deal with each other as regular human beings, and we can continue to improve our society. And so this is a norm that has been implemented within this Islamic society that if we took this on as a people, this is something that would become a part of our new civilization, if you will. And so then we can begin to see each other in a more of a respectful way. And so with that, also when we with the hypersexualization comes is related to problems that we mentioned earlier about children being born out of wedlock, because sex and sexual activity is so easily accessible, and it's very accessible, unfortunately, to young people who may experiment with sex or have many sexual partners, and may lead to children being born, accidentally, and that leads to other problems. And so the Islamic solution for that is to, besides having these protection for the women, women are uh, protected from by their male relatives and until they get married. And so then after that, their husband is responsible for taking care of them. What happens is that the male relatives protect the woman and to make sure that if a man is interested in getting to know a woman, he goes to the male relatives and say that I'm interested in meeting your sister or meeting your whatever for your daughter for the sake of marriage. And so then there's a supervised situation that goes on where they can meet each other, in a supervised setting and get to know each other for the sake of marriage. And it doesn't have to take that long. They get to know each other, and then they can get married, and they can have, intercourse and do the things, from a marriage standpoint. And so the beauty of that is that, again, in that supervised situation, the woman's honor is protected and the man's honor is protected. And then eventually, if they decide, well, we don't like each other, we don't want to continue with this, courtship, if you will, then they go on and nothing is taken away. There's no honor that's taken from the woman and no honor that's taken from the man. And so, and then this eliminates, children out of wedlock and any type of other, complications that can come from having, an open society where men and women just, interact with each other unsupervised and so forth. So then with the hypersexualization that comes from women, of course, the attire, the dress attire is a big factor, right? The same with men as well. And so, and of course, in an Islamic society, women have a certain dress code, as do men. Okay, Muslim men have a dress code as well. And so the dress code for a woman is the hijab and her face. She's allowed to show her face, their hands, and so forth. And for the man, he's required to cover, from his below his belly button to his knees. And so those are the things that are required for him to in most cases for him to cover. Okay. And so they're different. The dress codes are different because women have more, they're different from men. And they have more beauty than the man has. Okay, more physical beauty than the man does. And so with that, okay, that comes when those rules are followed, then that also leads to the less sexualization that goes on in public. And so, and then you have a more harmonious society where people are able um, uh, to operate in a much more civilized situation. And this also cuts down on another issue is sexual diseases. So if we look at Africa as a very good example, sub-Saharan Africa is riddled with AIDS. It's getting much better, but there was a really big problem with AIDS, and so and other sexual diseases. But we found that in the Muslim parts of Africa, not to say there are no sexual diseases, but the occurrences of AIDS and other sexually transmitted diseases is much lower because there is some adherence to these norms. And so this leads to less issues related to that. Also, with the other problems that we mentioned about the within the African American culture, with the lack of education, and that can also prison can become a problem. And so with prison in this country, we know that prison is a revolving door. It opens, closes, open, closes, and so people go in, they go back out, or they go in again, and so it's just a revolving door because the system here is not designed to punish, but it's more of a system designed to manage the people, and there's money to be made off of prison labor, and so and oftentimes it's minorities who are the biggest um, you know, the largest population inside of prisons. And so it's a revolving door where they go in and go out, and then ultimately they become institutionalized because they're in so long and the conditions are such that they don't get much help or rehabilitation from their stay there. And so they become residual prisoners where they just go in and out many times and they're institutionalized, and it's just a problem for the rest of their lives. And so but if we had the other things in place that were previously mentioned, the other stop gaps in place, then that would eliminate some of this problem. And then also the punishments in Islam for certain types of things are very, very harsh. And the reason being is because they serve as a deterrent. Because, for example, there are people who've committed multiple murders who are in prison and who may even get out in the prison system that we currently have. But if people understand that if you commit murder, that you're not going to have a couple of years, to, live in prison, whatever. Even when you're on death row, you may be on death row for 10 years. But if a person is killed within, there's a thorough investigation, and the person was paid for their punishment with, capital punishment. If they paid for their sentence with capital punishment, and then that was publicly viewable, that would probably change the minds of a lot of criminals. That would be a great deterrent for a lot of people. But before you get to that point, there has to be things in place, because we couldn't just implement something like that in the United States, because we have so many other issues with racism and so forth, and injustice, that you don't start with that type of thing. You have to start with the basics before you get to something like that. And so, but just to let you know that societies, cultures that do have those, they have less problem with that type of criminal behavior, because there's more of a respect for life, and the people know that the punishment for committing that type of crime is severe. And so, and also the lack of human life and senseless killing. We know this is a big problem in our culture, in America in general. And so that with Islam, the emphasis is placed on your relationship with Allah, with the Creator, and yourself. And you know that when you commit these type of actions against other people, that your punishment can be very severe. Not even if you get away with it in this life, that your punishment can be very severe in the afterlife. And so it's important that you value human life, because that's the relationship that you have with the Creator. And it is important to do that so that you don't destroy your relationship with the Creator. And then we believe that Islam is a cure for all of mankind. But when we look at the issues in the United States and how racism is within the fabric of this society, Islam will is the only thing that will save the society. There's no legislation, or there's no referendums, or there's no presidential candidates that can actually change this situation. That if once Islam gets into the hearts and minds of these people, and that will allow us as a nation, as a greater civilization, to fix the problems, the issues that we have in the society, because that's the only thing that will. Everything else has failed. We've tried, the democratic processes, and this political party and that political party, and these views, conservatives and liberals, and all these other types of political ideologies, and ultimately they will fail, because the society, the way that it was it wasn't started for the sake of Allah, and it wasn't started with the idea that all humans are valuable, because the people, they had a God's a system that they thought was godly, but it wasn't a complete system, and it wasn't a true system. And so ultimately, these are the things that will save this society. Is Islam is what will save this society. And this is a specific message to the African American people, because Islam is something that will make tremendous changes in our lives, in our existence in this country. And so this is something that the people should consider. So thank you for watching this video.